Hello, everybody, and welcome to the VIA Pioneer Speaker Series. My name is Ryan Nemec. I'm a psychologist and the Education Director of the VIA Institute on Character, and I'm very pleased to welcome Caroline Adams-Miller as our guest presenter here today, and I'm going to be introducing Caroline very soon. But first, just a couple housekeeping points. One is, at any point during this talk, feel free to ask Caroline questions by emailing me. So all you need to do is send the message to ryan@viacharacter.org. ryan@viacharacter.org, and I will do the best I can to bring those questions to Caroline, and she will be presenting some wonderful material and will be answering your questions. And one other housekeeping piece is just to alert you that VIA's next workshop, next 7-week workshop, is actually starting in 2 weeks on May 9th. And this is our flagship course that we've run several times. And this course is an intermediate course that includes 7 lectures. It includes interactive Skype groups that people work with core concepts relating to character strengths, and it includes handouts and scholarly articles, video links. It actually includes a free one-on-one session with someone at VIA to coach you on your strengths. That's a kind of a new feature we're letting people know about up front. And it also includes 2 free VIA Pro reports, the detailed 25-page report that's a deep analysis of character strengths. So if you'd like to be part of that course, you can register on the VIA site. It's at viacharacter.org. And also, Kelly Alloys, VIA Communications Specialist, will be emailing everybody after this course and letting them know that you will receive a $25 coupon off of that course because you were part of this speaker series with Caroline Adams-Miller. So you'll look for that in your mail shortly after the course. So again, welcome to this VIA Pioneer Speaker Series, and the reminder that this is a series that hosts speakers who are leading the charge in character strength applications around the world. They're leading the charge in applying the best research and practice with character strengths in their own respective fields. And right now we're in the middle of the business track. Some of you might have joined us from some of our first series back in the end of last year, and we had 4 sessions on coaching and counseling, which are archived on our site, which you can access for free. So now we are in our business track, and I'm very excited to have Caroline Adams-Miller be our speaker here today. Truly, the word pioneer in this title here, pioneer, applies perfectly to her, as she is a true pioneer in integrating character strengths with the science of goal setting. And she's done this work in many different settings: the business setting, government settings, education settings, extensive work with coaching and training coaches, and on and on. And a little bit more about Caroline. Her bio is incredibly impressive and long because there's so much great things to say about her. She's a best-selling author. The book that you might be most familiar with is a book that came out recently called Creating Your Best Life. This is actually Caroline's, her 6th book will be coming out in September, so she's authored a number of different books. So this book, Creating Your Best Life, is a wonderful book. We have it at VIA on our shelf as well on goal setting and applying the latest science of positive psychology to goal setting, and it's a very unique book, a one-of-a-kind, actually. Caroline is also a frequent media personality. So if you actually go to her website, carolinemiller.com, you'll find a host of wonderful different interviews and videos of Caroline in the media, and she's a very frequent media personality. You can actually learn about her through the Washington Post, New York Times. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, CNN. She's been commented on positively by Diane Sawyer, Dr. Oz, and many, many more. A little bit more about Caroline. She's a graduate of Harvard University and also a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania in the Masters in Applied Positive Psychology program, and is credentialed through ICF, which is the International Coach Federation, and a graduate of Coach U. And You can learn a lot more about Caroline, actually through this presentation, and also when you go to carolinemiller.com. So very much gratitude and a deep bow to you, Caroline, for being here today. Welcome.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That very, very generous introduction. And I am thrilled beyond thrilled to be asked to do this because the VIA character strengths language has been an integral part of my practice ever since I graduated from the Master's in Applied Positive Psychology program in their pioneer year, back 2005, 2006. That was back when, you know, Marty kind of took a gamble on about 34 of us and said, let's go apply positive psychology to your respective professions. I was one of, I think, about 3 coaches in that class, all different kinds of coaches, but really the applied degree from Penn has really opened a lot of us up to take things like the VIA and improve upon what it is we do professionally. And in my case, I'm a very specific kind of coach. So let me give you just a little bit of background on who I am and the context for what I'm going to present to you today. I do have a highly specialized practice. It happens to be uniquely suited to what my character strengths are. So it's very interesting to see what my strengths are and see, wow, this is exactly why I do what I do. I am a goal-setting specialist, as you know, as Ryan just said. My latest book, Creating Your Best Life, was the first mass-market evidence-based book on goal setting, which still to this day shocks me. I remember when I told Marty in the fall of 2005, I said there are no books in any bookstore that I can find that have a single footnote. There's no reference to research. There's nothing. And I was really fascinated by it and have decades. I want to explain to you in the next slide a little bit about how this even came to be part of my DNA. But I'm very, very focused on forward movement. I really want people to have what we're saying here, productivity and success. I'm not about having expensive chats with people. I'm really about engaging people in the process of leaving behind the legacy they want to leave behind, getting the things done that they want to get done, taking the risks that they've maybe always wanted to take but haven't had the ability to do so. It is not for everyone, but fortunately, what I love about the VIA is that when I was introduced to it, and I was introduced to it in the very first assignment at Penn in 2005, which is what I now give to every single client first assignment, and I'll tell you a little bit about why. But this language is perfect. It is absolutely perfect for every aspect of what I've developed, and it has enriched every part of my dialogue, every part of my work, from the introduction to the evaluation of goals in somebody, where someone stands in life, to upping their well-being, then to framing and pursuing their goals, and then even how to celebrate success. So there's no facet of my work that is immune to what it is we're talking about here, which is character strengths. So as I said, I was very fortunate, really, really fortunate that Marty and Chris were our 2 main professors that year, and they're the creators of the VIA. So every single month for 4 or 5 days, nonstop, we had Marty and Chris talking a lot about not just positive psychology, but how they came to create this scale. So I feel like I was just one of the luckiest people in the world. If I was going to use the VIA, the Masters introduced it to me, and my gratitude is immeasurable because of that. But I have been using it for 7 years constantly. I almost feel like the VIA is my second or third language. When I talk to people, that's what I see. I see their strengths, and I see it in VIA language. So it is a new language for a lot of people. A lot of people who come to me, I coach people. I don't say I coach leaders or teams or whatever. I coach a lot of people across a lot of different parts of the world. So I don't necessarily say I just do this or I just do that. I coach people. And this language is relevant to all people. And a lot of them are used to just having professional language like the Gallup Signature Strengths. So for a lot of them, they're incredibly grateful that I'm using a new language with them. Of course, it's become so popular that a lot of people know about the VIA, but for many, it's new. They've had Myers-Briggs, they've had Gallup Strengths Finder, they've had a lot of different things. And they're kind of sick of tests, but this one never grows old. They really, really love it. Now, in my class at Penn, Tom Rath, who's the author of StrengthsFinder 2.0, and you know, he's one of the top guys at Gallup and has written a series of wonderful, wonderful books on strengths. We were able to really talk to him a lot that year because he was our classmate about the differences between the VIA. And signature strengths. And I have found that to be also an extremely valuable part of my education. So I know the difference. Two brilliant people in my class actually ran and did a spreadsheet on everyone's VIA, everyone's Myers-Briggs, and everyone's signature strengths, lined them up, and that was a really interesting kind of education in how are they similar, how's the wording different, how are they complementary, because I think they're very complementary. But I choose to use the VIA for a lot of different reasons we probably don't have to go into, but I think it's a rich, nuanced, very applicable set of words that everyone seems to resonate to. And then two quick disclaimers. I just want to be sure. I want people to understand I'm not a researcher, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not a psychiatrist. I am an applied positive psychologist. As I said a minute ago, I apply the research of positive psychology to my profession, which happens to be a goal-setting specialty in an evidence-based practice. And I will be presenting some case histories today, and I want you all to understand that confidentiality is huge in my practice. For all kinds of reasons, but I think it's just necessary for all of us to be discreet. So I have altered some of the case histories. So just so you know that I will not be talking about clients per se. Details are altered just so you can get the gist of what is really important about how I'm using it and why I'm using it. So let me give you a context about me because I'm just kind of fascinated that my strengths are really perfect for what I do, and I think we all have to ask ourselves, what are our strengths? And how does this make us suited for what we do? So it was the first question I really asked myself. But this is my great uncle Platt Adams. One of my clients is a photographer who actually dug this picture out of the Library of Congress. And it is my uncle Platt winning the 1912 Olympics in Stockholm, Sweden. And it was the first Olympics with flash photography, and it's just so cool that I now am able to see it. But what's really relevant here is in my family, there has been a lot of emphasis on just excellence. How do you pursue excellence? How do you pursue success? When is it too much? When is it pursued for the wrong reasons? So this kind of DNA that I have grown up with, it almost killed me, and that's the part of what I'll share in the next slide, in the next two slides. But what I've found is a way to put it into the proper place. Goal setting should never be done just for extrinsic reasons, which is why I feel that all coaches who work with goal setting need to understand goal setting theory and all of the nuances, and a lot of them are in my book, so I don't want to go on and on about that. But what I do want to say is goal setting is not just goal setting. A goal is not a goal is not a goal. You really have to understand what goes into it. But I feel like I was uniquely kind of brought into the world of competitiveness by, I was a swimmer. I have a black belt, competitive swimmer. Now I'm a competitive rower. And I saw a bald eagle this morning when I was rowing on the Potomac River. So I bring kind of an athletic mindset and athletic background to it. And it's really made me more appreciative, I think, of all of the things it takes to be successful. But back to the VIA. The wording of the VIA has helped me to understand better how people can apply the right kinds of strengths in the right way, in the right measure, to get things done, but also how can we overuse or underuse some of the strengths that may or may not be helpful to us. So another thing that I think is important for us to recognize is the New York Times just wrote published a very interesting article on Sunday that I highly recommend, and it was written by a therapist about the process of therapy. And one of the things he said is that too many people are languishing in therapy because there are no goals applied to it. That we really need to take a look at a lot of the activities we're engaged in, but therapy was the point of this article, and say, what are the measurable outcomes to this work? Because again, we need to understand how to evaluate and measure what it is we're trying to accomplish. And it's caused a lot of really interesting discussions, but there's so many realms in life where we really do need to understand, what I'm going to talk about. So what I've done is I've come up over several decades, but particularly in my work through Penn and with hundreds, if not thousands of people I've worked with, I've come up with this 8-part goal success plan. Much of it I put in Creating Your Best Life, which was my capstone project. I do want to acknowledge that Dr. Michael Frisch, I did ask him to help me write the book, and I do want to say he was able to contribute something called the Happiness House exercise, so I don't want to just jump over that, but it's a 3-page exercise in the book, and I thank him for that. But this was really my capstone, and it was, as I said, the first evidence-based book on the market. So what I've done is I've come up with this 8-part success plan. I will go through it with you, But what I'm going to talk about is how do I use character strengths in every single part of it. Because as I said, there's no part of this particular way that I work with people that doesn't involve VIA strengths. So this is really what they are. Where are you? Then the me at my best, then the positive activity interventions, which used to be called just positive interventions, now it's PAIs. How do you craft goals? Mindset and behavior, and I think what I've done here is a little bit new. I don't think there are any other books that really line up the steps like this, but you can't really set goals without first addressing this whole part about me at my best and where are you in the flourishing world. And it really kind of is a nod to Marty Seligman's new pronouncement of what is flourishing. He's gone from authentic happiness theory to PERMA. And the last A in that acronym is achievement, which I feel very strongly and positively about. Achievement is part of a flourishing life. So I don't have time to talk about that really, but I do want to say it is part of Marty Seligman's new statement. So crafting goals, mindset, petri dish, resilience, and savoring and celebrating. I guess, Brian, before I get any further, should we just pause and see if anyone has any questions?
It's going good, right? Going good so far. You can kind of keep on rolling.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. So the first thing that comes up when I work with people is I get a call or an email saying, will you work with me here? Can you see, am I the kind of person you think you can work with? And so I schedule a half-hour free call where I basically ask the following questions, because when people come to me, they're really at a crossroads. Something is not getting accomplished in their lives. Something is missing, and they know it. And sometimes they know what's missing, and sometimes they don't know what's missing. So I have a series of questions I ask, and this is where I do strength spotting. This is where I really listen very carefully and take notes about what I think people's strengths are. So some of the things that I am looking for, because my work does involve some strengths more than others, but I'm looking for things like zest. I'm looking for hope. I'm looking for sense of purpose, because spirituality and sense of purpose, because I often find that when people come to me, sense of purpose is near the bottom. Or sometimes it's at the top, but they aren't carrying out what they believe to be their sense of purpose because they have other strengths that aren't quite as high that would allow them to really take action. But sense of purpose and things like hope and zest are sometimes lower than they ought to be. And so I begin to spot that with some of my questions. Curiosity and bravery. Now, bravery sometimes is closer to the bottom when you have someone who's an information gatherer. They have strengths at the head. So I'm kind of taking notes about where do I think that is. And I'm also looking for people who are ready to work, who want to be a finisher, who don't want to just be people who start things. They want to be finishers. They want to take the steps that they need to take, because coaching is hard. Working towards your goals is hard. Talking about your goals, talking about things you want to do is not quite as difficult. So again, I'm asking some questions that lead me to understand their strengths, but also, where are they? I'm not the right coach for everyone, so I think this is an important thing about what's the fit. And one of the early signs that I'm a fit is a great VIA strength, which is hope. Hope, optimism, and future-mindedness. If at the end of the call where I've asked things like, will you regret not taking these actions that you're thinking about, that to me is one of the most powerful questions I ask people, because when they pause and say, yes, I really will regret not taking these risks, and at the end of the call they say, I feel hopeful. I feel more empowered than I did half an hour ago. That's quite often when I get my first sense that this is a fit. So I'm looking for hope, and I find that coaching often is a wonderful intervention on hope. I find that the needle moves on hope more than almost any other character strength, 1 to 24. I find that that one moves most readily when people suddenly feel like someone's in their corner, someone's going to help them articulate and pursue these things. Maybe they don't necessarily have this petri dish I'll talk about in a minute, but or in a few minutes, but they feel like something can change. And so the energy, you hear their voice change. I'm always looking for the cadence of the voice and the zest and the determination, because one of the things that Barbara Fredrickson told me a long time ago, and she's the author of Positivity and just a brilliant woman with a brilliant body of research. But one of the things she told me is that if you are speaking with somebody and you garble the words so people don't really understand what you're saying, people can still intuit from the cadence of the voice, the energy in the voice, and the warmth, whether or not someone is full of zest and hope and optimism or not. So I can hear a change in kind of the warmth and the cadence of the voice. And so I am also looking for what else have people pursued that would make this the right time, because you really want to be sure that this is the right time. Timing is everything. So as I strength spot, I ask these questions, and then I asked them to do this first assignment, which was my first assignment. So I'm going to use myself here as the example, because I think it's sometimes helpful to see how it kind of was a eureka moment for me. But also, I continue to marvel that my strengths just are, boom, this is me. So Marty asked us to do me at my best as our first assignment. And if I agree to work with someone, this is the next step. I asked them to take the VIA. First thing, I bought a huge package of VIA Pro reports. I really think that expanded report is great. So all my clients take that. And then I asked them to look at their top 5 strengths and to write an essay about when they remember feeling completely authentic in themselves, in their lives, that they did something that felt great, had a great outcome, other people reflected back to them that this was a peak moment in their lives. But that kind of says it, me at my best. So when I saw my lineup, that's the exact order they're in: love and be loved, creativity, zest, wisdom, and bravery. I just had one of those lightning bolt moments where I said, I know when I'm at my best, and I know when my absolute best has already been. And it was when I wrote my first book. It's called My Name is Caroline. Some people have heard of it. It became a bestseller in 1988. It's still in print. And I happened to write the first book by a survivor of bulimia, which is a very serious eating disorder. I was bulimic for 7 years from the ages of 15 to 22, and I bottomed out and almost died. But back in those times, a long time ago, there was no treatment available for people like me, none whatsoever. There were a lot of theories, but I'm not even sure it was in the DSM. So what I did was I put my story together in this book. I wrote this first book, so I kind of broke new ground. It started this autobiographical genre of recovery memoirs. And it involved all of my strengths. I mean, you can see I had to love myself in order to fight hard, to just be alive. I also needed to love other people enough to want to share some of the most personal details of my life. So that made sense. Check. Creativity. I had to tell the story in such a way that people felt energized and hopeful and excited. And so my creativity was in play immediately. Now, zest. I'm sure a lot of you have already felt that I have a lot of zest. I do. I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of enthusiasm for life. I'm one of the few people, according to the VIA Institute, who actually is an adult with zest in the top 5, because it moves to bottom 5 for a lot of people. So it's top 5 for me. Wisdom, how can you not develop a little bit of wisdom when you bottom out at 21? So I had that. And then bravery. Now, one thing that's interesting, I look at Robert Biswas Steiner's new book on courage, and I think one thing I really identify with is people who have bravery don't feel brave. There was never a point where I said I'm a brave person, how wonderful that I have the courage to write this. Never occurred to me. I never felt like I had a choice. So that was interesting for me, and I hear this a lot from people. They see courage or bravery or other strengths lined up, and they say, isn't everyone like this? Isn't this everyone's first response to something like this? And the answer is no. So that's how I approach coaching with people, and I ask them to write this. Now, I get several interesting things that occur, because it doesn't always have a positive outcome. It has some kind of moving outcomes that I want to kind of share with you. So many of them are engaged by it, and they say, oh, this gives me a language that makes sense to me. I am a curious person. I do appreciate beauty and excellence. They've never thought of it in that way. They are hopeful, optimistic. I've had one person cross my path in 7 years who had all 5 of the traits associated with well-being in their top 5. And it truly was a flourishing individual. So it was really, yes, that is what it looks like. So they own it, they feel good, they say, yes, I need more of these moments in my life, because I know Michelle McQuaid presented last month about very few people honestly say, I use my strengths on a daily basis. I get things done with my top 5 strengths. So people who do this say, gee, I do need to feel more like this, I need more of that. Now, I teach at the University of Texas, Dallas, so I work with a lot of kind of high-level executives who come through it for this. It's an evidence-based, solution-focused coaching degree. It's a very, very fine program. So I get a lot of men in the senior kind of level of their life, their professional life, and sometimes what I get is kind of a wistfulness, because they recall a me at my best time that's maybe 20 years ago. And many of them have, say, spirituality. I had a class last year where I'd say 1/3 of the people had spirituality and sense of purpose at the top. But they didn't really feel like the sense of purpose that they had now in their professional lives matched them at their best with the same strengths 20, 30 years earlier. So sometimes people's goals shift as a result of seeing their strengths and the me at my best essays, which is something I never expected to have happen. They identify with a time that is now kind of lost to them, and they change their goals to bring more of different kinds of outcomes into their lives. So that's one thing I didn't expect that's been very interesting. For the most part, people are empowered. It's helpful to them to remember that they've been successful. Some people come in kind of low in hope, and they say, gosh, I've never really been successful in the ways I want to be, or haven't been a finisher. This gives them a chance to be positive and proactive and say, I have been that person and I want more of it. Another thing that I have a lot, and I'm sure anyone who uses the VIA experiences this too, is some people are surprised, particularly men that I work with, who all want leadership as their #1 strength. Or they want bravery, or they want something that they think is kind of manly, and they're kind of bummed out. It's like, well, how could this be a good test if I don't have leadership in my top 5, and I'm a CEO, or I'm a this, or I'm a that? When the fact is, and one of the things Chris Peterson shared with us, is that when he studied Medal of Honor winners, so some of the bravest people in the history of the United States, in terms of wartime experiences, they had kindness, they had love and be loved, they had some of the softer strengths of the heart, because that's what allowed them to put their lives on the line for their fellow man or fellow woman. And so when I began to explain some of the languaging and what's really behind it in terms of how it can come out in different situations, people calm down a little bit, but they're kind of used to signature strengths and businessy language. This sometimes has to be interpreted and explained differently. It always goes well when you go a little bit more deeply into what's behind it. But really, kindness, love, these are some of the signs of people who are really, beloved by their fellow men in military settings. So that's been a wonderful piece of knowing Chris Peterson and seeing some of his work up front. Other things that people sometimes lament is they're bummed that teamwork is not higher. I'm working with a gentleman right now who runs a very large company, and he's a leader, but he's not good at teamwork, and he didn't want to see that. He does other things very, very well, but this was an eye-opener for him. It's like, wow, I need to know this about myself. It also is great. I love the VIA because it actually makes things real. You can suspect a lot of things about yourself, but to have a test, a very rigorous, comprehensive test, kind of rank them and say, really, you think you're a curious person, but it's number 23. Maybe that's something you really need to work more at. So I also have those reactions, which is I'm glad to know it, and maybe we have to work on some interventions there. Okay, so that's what we do, me at my best. I write people's character strengths, their top 5 and their bottom 5 on the front of their folders. And so beginning of every day, I take people's folders out, and every conversation involves us looking at, the front of the folder and basically saying, how does that fit into this discussion?
Excuse me, Caroline.
Yeah.
Here's a quick question regarding the me at my best exercise. Do you adjust the exercise based on the population? So do you adjust it a little bit for the business setting versus education versus government versus who you're working with?
I leave it up to people how they want to share an experience with me. Some people prefer to give me me at my best. I reorganize this I reorganized this division, and we had, #1 productivity in, in this year, and I was able to really, when I had to lay people off, I did it with kindness and generosity, and, that's fine. But I also encourage people to try to think of whether or not they're that same person in their personal lives, because sometimes what comes up for me is they do things really well in one setting in life but not in another. And so you can be a leader at work and not a leader at home. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I ask people to use their discretion. What do you want to share with me? It is, of course, confidential. But I'd say it's about half and half. Some people choose to remember me at my best because it's the first thing that pops up with them. I mean, I could easily talk about the growth of my coaching business with my top 5 strengths, but the one that just resonated instantly was that first book. That's why I share it with people. So I think I leave it up to people.
Excellent. And one other quick question before moving on that's kind of related on this topic, the topic of Zest in particular. Do you think that Zest and self-regulation go together? Is self-regulation sort of a platform for allowing Zest? And,
No.
and as you're right before you answer that, just to remind everybody that you can continue to ask questions by emailing me at ryan@viacharacter.org.
Ryan, that is such a great question, because I do look for those. Self-regulation obviously is critical with certain kinds of goals, some goals more than others, especially big goals. But you can have someone who's high in zest and low in self-regulation, and they're impulsive. So they don't always go together. In fact, self-regulation, as you know, is one of the last or bottom 2 traits for many people. We're in a country where self-regulation has gone backwards. It's instant gratification. We have an epidemic of all kinds of things like online gambling. People want immediate fixes. So self-regulation has gone backwards. I have a whole chapter on that in my book. So they don't go together. They can, but not necessarily. Does that answer
Excellent.
that?
Yep, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So in order for me to go to this step, which is, what we've decided to work together, we've identified strengths, we've identified me at my best, how do those strengths kind of play out in your daily life? Then I immediately go into this other thing, which is really what I call a daily boot-up menu. I mean, it's really essential to work with people on helping them to understand the happiness equation, which is, happiness equals set point plus circumstances plus volitional behavior. So that V is about half of your daily well-being, and that's about interventions, behaviors, goal pursuit, that kind of thing. So it's really important. But then this other seminal piece of research called Benefits of Frequent Positive Affect, and that was Lubomirsky, Diener, and King. And it came out in 2006, I think it was. And one of the things it said is you scan or look at all of the research, whether it's longitudinal or qualitative, whatever it is. You look at success in all these life domains, and it's always preceded by flourishing. Emotional flourishing. So for that reason, because I have a goal-setting practice, I cannot work on goal setting without first addressing this piece of how can you get yourself to the upper end of your emotional flourishing range on a daily basis, because it will simply help you. It's part of the assets that you want to develop in your life. If someone comes into wanting to be more productive and more successful, but they're depressed or they're not hopeful or whatever it is, it's simply not going to work as well as if you go to this place and you talk about a boot-up menu. It's like you turn on a computer and it has a bunch of programs that run in the background that make the computer optimized for work. That's what we talk about. I have a worksheet called Jolts of Joy in the back of my book where I ask people, what is it that brings you joy? Now, everyone's different. I mean, I've never found anyone who had the same set of things that make them happy, but there's some that have more, research behind them than others. So we talk about things like gratitude, meditation, the appreciation of music. We talk about exercise. So basically what we try to come up with is what are the things you can do to optimize your well-being? And strengths comes up in these discussions almost more than anything, because if you want to bring more gratitude into your life, because it is correlated with being a flourishing person, and let's say it's number 24, there's so many wonderful gratitude interventions. You want to know where those 5 that are associated with flourishing, and they've got them on the right: zest, curiosity, gratitude, love and be loved, and hope. I look for where those 5 are. And I explained their importance to people because when those are at the bottom, Chris was really careful to say that, you can talk about, strengths and lesser strengths, but at the same time, let's not play games here. You don't want gratitude to be number 24. You don't want zest to be number 24. You want to know where they are. So we talk about how those can come up through daily PAIs, positive activity interventions, to precede this goal pursuit. And so everyone's different, but that's a piece of where we start. Let me see if I had any other notes. So there are interventions to bring up things like zest. Now, I'm particularly fascinated by zest. I really am. It's one of my favorite things to look at. I heard Kim Cameron speak at George Mason 2 weeks ago at the Resilience Conference for their Center for Consciousness and Transformation. I've heard him several times, but one of the most interesting things Kim Cameron talks about is in the workplace, there are people they've identified as positive energizers. And your proximity to a positive energizer. So by definition, these are zestful people. These are people who energize other people. They make them feel more hopeful, more optimistic, more energized, just everything that's positive. These positive energizers actually predict better work performance, how close you are to them. So I'm really interested in the fact that when you see zest in the workplace, and I did ask him, though, I asked him if they'd ever run the VIA, and correlated zest with the positive energizers, and they haven't done it, and he told me to go do the research. So that's coming up. I will do that at some point. But I think zest is really important. Like, who are you close to? Where are the people who actually make your life better and more energized? And then curiosity. I'm working with a leader in another country who is at a very high position and wants to go even higher. And one of the things we've talked about is that while he masters the intricacies of numbers, and again, remember, I am giving you I'm bringing together several different qualities. I'm not giving you an exact case study, so don't worry that I'm giving away somebody. I really want people to understand it's not an exact person. It's kind of a compilation of some traits. But this is a man who doesn't have much curiosity about the people who work beneath him or with him, and it's really held him back, and he didn't understand why it mattered so much till he looked at his VIA, saw it low. We talked about things like the Project Oxygen at Google, where they identified who are the best managers at Google. Google Googled Google to find this out. And really the number one trait of some of these top managers is that they're curious. They care about the people who work with them above and beyond, are you a cog in getting things done? So we've worked on curiosity and interventions, just asking people how was their weekend. So it's been really important for him to have more personal experiences and conversations with people based on him seeing that curiosity was near the bottom of his list. Because if he doesn't bring that up, I think his chances of being able to work with people at the level he wants to work with them are a little bit lower. Same with gratitude. I remember Chris saying that gratitude is actually the most highly correlated strength with well-being. Is that true, Ryan?
Actually, Zest and Hope are the two. Gratitude always comes up in the top in the top 5 when those studies are done repeatedly. But yeah, Zest and Hope are the ones with the really, really high correlations with
that. Oh, that's so great. That's very interesting. Thank you for clarifying that. I really appreciate it. But gratitude is something we always look at, loving others and being loved back, and then hope. So this is where we go to next. What are you going to do that's, the V in the happiness equation that's going to involve using your character strengths to bring more music, more people, more exercise, more appreciation of beauty and excellence? Are you going to change your driving route? What are you going to do with your strengths to actually put yourself the upper end of flourishing? Now, one of the things I do is I use Pinterest now. It's one of the fastest growing websites of all time. I have found Pinterest to be a great place to take your character strengths and show this is how zest manifests itself in my life. So you can see those are my toenails on the upper left. Those are my running shoes in the middle. That's my Easter egg wreath. That's my son with a blow up on our front lawn. I mean, you can just see I kind of have fun with life. I don't take myself too seriously. And I think that's a piece of what allows me to kind of be a little childlike in a fun way. But Pinterest is a wonderful way for people to express their character strengths and see them and build on them. And it just kind of keeps it uppermost in front of mind. I also think for people who want to build character strengths, I think a Pinterest board is a wonderful assignment, because if you're low in curiosity or wisdom or whatever, but you want it to come up, start a board on the ways in which wisdom can be expressed in your life or celebrated or savored. Remind yourself often of the things that would contribute to it. Love and Be Loved, I just started a VIA board on this, and I found a variety of different ways and pictures, but I don't want to dwell too much on myself. The next step is to really create goals, important goals, and goals that are scientifically based, because I work with goal-setting theory. Goal-setting theory is something I'd never heard about until I got to Penn, and yet I'm a coach, and it's one of the coaching competencies through the ICF. And I have to say, I was really disappointed that many of the coaching programs I was, aware of and had taken never ever uttered goal-setting theory. So I think a lot of coaches in particular need to understand that goal-setting theory is something you need to know about performance goals and learning goals. So when I say carefully create goals, that's what I'm talking about. And I use something called Best Possible Self, which is a twofer. Best Possible Self says you spin into the future and everything is gone as well as possible. By the way, I make this exercise. It's available as a free worksheet on my website if you want to see it. But it's a Sonia Lyubomirsky intervention. Everything is gone as well as possible in 5 to 10 years. And you write about it in 3 consecutive days, 20 minutes at a time. And what it does is, first of all, it intervenes on you. So it makes people happier, I think, for as long as 6 months. The second thing is you begin to identify this gap, between where you are and where you want to be. And once you identify the gap, you can begin to set goals and prioritize them. Best Possible Self also does something called, it illuminates goals in conflict. Goals in conflict is kind of this not well-known body of work in the goal-setting world. I have it in my book, but I think it's really, really important that a lot of us are walking around with goals in conflict, meaning if we pursue one, it's to the detriment of another one. And when you do Best Possible Self, it makes it clearer which goals those are and how you need to move one up and one down. We always talk about strengths. How are you going to use your strengths to move towards these goals? But then also we have interesting conversations about how can your strengths be overused and possibly a hindrance. Now, this comes up in a couple different ways. So let me give you some kind of quasi-case histories or my observations. I have found that many people get held up because they have modesty or prudence at the top. And they're very nervous about either going public, being recognized, or taking unnecessary risks. So they have goals that don't necessarily play to their strengths. So one of the things we have to talk about is how has modesty and prudence, and maybe even throw in diligence there, how have those things actually been helpful in your life? Because there's obviously a payoff or it wouldn't be in the top 5. But then how can you neutralize them in such a way that lesser strengths can be combined or brought up individually to help you with this goal? So you have to recognize you may not necessarily have the right strengths at times to pursue certain goals, and that has to be discussed because I see it so often that I have to mention it. So modesty and prudence can get in the way if there's a public goal and certain risks are involved. Another thing I think I see, this might be the most common thing I see, are people who are information gatherers. And they read books and they're just always interviewing the next person, and they're always creating plans for success. And I'm going to say this is 100%, I see this. I immediately see that they have strengths at the head. They've got wisdom, they've got love of learning, they've got creativity, but what they are low in usually is bravery and let's see, sometimes self-regulation is high, but bravery, zest, and sometimes hope. So with clients like that, when I see that kind of lineup, and we basically discuss, is this true? Are you someone who tends to just gather a lot of information and you don't pull the trigger? We need to come up with, a plan. How long are you going to continue to gather information before we agree that risks need to be taken? And it's very helpful to them to conceptualize it in this way. Say, yes, I see where this might be a strength, but also a weakness. Because remember, strengths have dark sides. Strengths are not always strengths in certain settings, so this is an important conversation. Another thing I see, and I think I just referenced this, is when curiosity is low and a need for leadership and bonding with people you work with or even people in your personal life, your family. When you don't have curiosity, you tend to not be able to build some of those important relationships. And I'm going to refer to Barbara Fredrickson here, broaden and build. One of the things she's found is that when you're content and flourishing, you tend to be more curious. You have more confidence about going out into the environment and seeing, what's out here for me. What can I learn here? So curiosity is sometimes so low that you need to have an intervention on someone who simply has more strengths at the head. Here's another one. When self-regulation's at the bottom or near the bottom, and someone has a lot of self-regulation goals, and especially if there's more than one. And let me give you examples of self-regulation goals. Writing a book is a massive self-regulation goal. Anything that involves delayed gratification, where there's got to be short-term mastery experiences because the win is so far away, if you have self-regulation at the bottom, one of the things we have to talk about are self-regulation interventions, and there are many of them. I include a few in my book that I came up with, but a great one is just, and I have an interview with Roy Baumeister. I have a podcast on my website where he says it better than I will ever say it, because he's done so much great research on self-regulation. But he said the Jesuit schools are great at things like that. Pick one thing, sitting up straighter, writing perfect cursive, but do something that involves diligence and persistence and kind of overriding a temptation to slack off. Pick one thing, and one of the things you find is that other self-regulation behaviors, smoking, exercising, spending money, those things tend to get better just because you picked one thing to work on. So self-regulation and goals, you can't have a discussion of one without the other, because big goals in particular are going to involve delayed gratification. I have some research in my book by Oaten and Cheng. They're Australian researchers, and they really had some interesting research where they studied people who, in one case, just started a physical exercise program for 6 to 8 weeks. In another one, it was a money management 6 to 8 week intervention. And they tracked other behaviors like drinking coffee, like smoking, like drinking alcohol. And they found that if they just worked on the physical exercise or the money management, self-regulation got better. So that's an interesting strength to move the needle on. And I find that something that just always gets discussed with every client because of the nature of my practice. Here's another interesting example that I ran into not too long ago. I'm working with a gentleman who had several people he worked closely with who took advantage of him. And they did a variety of things that he forgave. And he forgave unforgivable behavior. He had forgiveness in his top 5. And he also has kindness in his top 5. And one of the things we discussed is how those were actually overused to his detriment. He also has social intelligence a little bit low, so he couldn't always read what was going on around him to the extent where he would know that certain behaviors don't always get forgiven. So what we've talked about are the situations, and he's aligning his goals to take advantage of kindness and forgiveness and also forgive himself for making some decisions that have hurt him, but to also see how overusing them is not always in his best interest in a professional setting. One more thing I wanted to say, because I see this all the time, then I'd love a question if anyone has one, is whenever I see someone has fairness and justice, so when I see fairness, equality, and justice in the top 5, I almost always see somebody who can compile endless lists of pros and cons about their goals. I mean, they can make a case for pretty much anything, and they will stay in conflict for a very long time unless you basically call them on it and say, we don't need any more lists, you don't need to gather any more data, and you really have to fight this tendency to make a case for anything because you don't want to actually take action. So it's a wonderful strength in some settings. I have a lot of clients for whom they're managing a lot of people, and it's a fantastic skill because they hear people out. And Ryan, we talked about fairness right before we came on. It's such a positive strength in so many professional settings. But where I see it comes into problem is when there's bravery low and fairness high, and decisions are not always made because everything looks equal. So any comments or questions?
Yeah, that's great. Do you see prudence in a similar way as fairness? That can be kind of a
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. What's your take on prudence? Because I know sometimes prudence is seen as the great strength for setting short-term goals and long-term goals. But I could see just in the way you describe fairness,
Yeah.
you could probably plug in the word prudence for that too, and the not taking risks or being really too cautious and being kind of held back from taking that next step. Do you find that in your
Yeah.
practice as well?
Absolutely do. I see it in two ways. One is people have been very prudent about what to pursue, and it's been very successful for them, but they are too prudent in some areas that will involve more risk-taking, because remember, the biggest risks involve the biggest rewards. And if anyone were to just sit here and scan their lives and say, what are the biggest risks I've ever taken, you will undoubtedly come up with what the biggest rewards have been, simply because, we're loss averse. We don't want to lose things. So people who are high and prudent try to avoid loss as often as possible. And it can be great. But boy, when it comes to a practice like mine, it can really be trouble, particularly when you put that with, let's even say, diligence or self-regulation. You've got people who work very hard at being prudent and self-regulated to the point where they can't take any risks, and there's just no fun. They don't even have fun in their lives. Everything is just something they've got to be careful about. So I want to say Pinterest I've also used for bucket list travel goals. It's a great way to put, especially people who are creative and who have appreciation of beauty and excellence, put your goals out there, do a scrapbook, do something that's going to make it come to life. So the next thing we do, and I want to be sure I cover all this, so I may just talk fast now, is the mindset. Mindset and behavior. So we've agreed to work together. We've talked about emotional flourishing. We've talked about ways to intervene. We've carefully crafted goals, and I mean carefully. We've done best possible self. Now we get to what's going on in your brain that may or may not help you. And this is where self-regulation, bravery, and zest really need to be addressed. Because if you're not hopeful and optimistic, we might have to do some of Marty's learned optimism interventions. Again, if you're low in hope, sometimes coaching simply brings it up. But there are times I've had to talk to people about, if you're low in hope, and this is one of the goals you have, what are other times you've been hopeless and you've been able to break the spell and move forward? Let's unpack success in that situation. I have a picture of alcohol here simply because one of the things Roy Baumeister said in my interview with him, but I think he said it elsewhere too, is the one undermining factor in all self-regulation goals is alcohol. It is the worst thing you can introduce into a self-regulatory situation with goals. So there are times when that does come up and it becomes something that people have to track or let go of for a period of time to see if they aren't more successful with the things that they want to achieve. So I have Pandora's box there up at the right. You need to have hope in order for, to have what's called pathways thinking, to become more creative, and to actually believe you have what it takes to achieve the goals you want. I have the marshmallows there because of Michelle's wonderful experiment on kids and marshmallows. And one of the things he found is that people who are low in self-regulation, who gobble that marshmallow, end up having more issues with behavior and friendships and jobs, and then later divorce and so on and so forth. So the most successful strategy those kids used is they put their heads on the desk or turned their backs on the marshmallow. So sometimes we have to talk about, how do you avoid temptation? How do you change your mindset and your behavior so that you're more likely to be successful? So that's self-regulation score, along with other kinds of things: zest, prudence, modesty, persistence. That comes out. Next thing we do is we ready the petri dish, and that means what's going on around you. How can you change or optimize the environment? And again, here we go with via character strengths. Many women, in fact 84% of women, endure what's called frenemies, which means they have these people who are like Debbie Downers, or people who are just not supportive of them at all, and they don't get rid of them because they're afraid of being nice. And one of the things we really have to talk about is it takes bravery, and it takes some social intelligence to actually remove some of the negative forces or put containers around negative forces. I have that wonderful picture of obese people because Christakis and Fowler's work on social contagion have found that obesity is contagious, as is loneliness, as is happiness, as is quitting smoking. You need to look around you and see who is in my corner and who is actually working against me. And some of your character strengths, like being kind, you may have overused and been kind to people who really shouldn't be in your life. I have a picture of Albert Hainsworth there because I'm a Washington Redskin fan, and this guy was so negatively socially contagious, we got rid of him. Biggest mistake in Washington Redskin football history. This guy in a locker room was toxic, and he's been toxic wherever he goes. Those kinds of people cannot be in your life. So again, we talk about how can you use humor. Let's say you have humor in your top 5. How can you use that to basically neutralize someone or disarm someone who's not necessarily the best person for you? I also talk a lot about things like priming. And I think I was the first one to kind of pull all of that interesting research on priming and John Barge's work on how can you use priming to change the cues that you put into your life, either deliberately or they're already there, and use them to behave in goal-directed ways. So people who are creative in particular, or who have high humor, they can come up with wonderful things. Like I encourage vanity license plates, and I collect them. I have a Pinterest board just on license plates because they can be good and they can be bad. I saw one at an airport that said late to work. Now that's not the prime you want to have on someone you're hiring. Late to work is not a good thing to have. But I've seen be funny, carpe diem, blessed, amen, alleluia, just on and on and on. Primes can be used, especially when you say to people, use your creativity. Use your curiosity, use your love of learning to see what it is that will impact you most effectively to prime your environment, and maybe use Goalwitzer's work on implementation intentions to triple your chance of, accomplishing hard goals. And there are my license plates. I thought I included some, but they're just kind of fun to look at. If you want to see my love to laugh, dog God I don't get yet, so I'm waiting for someone to explain it to you. Help? How would you like to drive around with a car that says help on it all the time? All right, so then we talk about, this is the next step. People get stuck, and they don't always succeed at what's important to them, and this is where we have to do one of two things. And it's a fine line you have between being a quitter and then being too persistent in the wrong goals. And again, this is where you have to understand goal-setting theory and these nuances, because you want to make sure that people either have a track record of being a finisher and understanding what it takes to be a finisher. And I'd say the second most given survey I use is the grit scale by Angela Duckworth, which I think is fascinating. And it predicts who drops out at West Point, for example. But long-term tough goals, like the National Spelling Bee, your grit score tends to predict whether or not you final in the National Spelling Bee. But people hit speed bumps, and this is where we talk about stress-hardy people have humor. They reframe things in such a way that they can endure it, or they disengage. So if you have persistence at the top and you're pursuing a goal that no longer fits your life, that's when you have to kind of pull people back and say, could you be persisting at the wrong goal? And if so, if we're going to disengage here and set a more appropriate goal, what are some of the strengths you can use? Let's be creative. Let's talk about the wisdom. What have you learned from pursuing this goal that will allow you to forgive yourself, disengage, and move forward? So again, strengths talk is just an inevitable piece of looking at, do you need to be more resilient and gritty, or do you need to disengage? Now, I have a picture of a ghost here to honor Laura King's wonderful work on lost possible selves. I don't think a lot of people know about it. I'll refer you to my podcast on my website, because one of the things Laura King found is that when your situation alters in such a way that it can't be changed back, so it's an unalterable change, you get divorced or you give birth to a Down syndrome child, you have to take a look at what you may have created in your head as far as a ghost self, the person you thought you were going to be. You thought you were going to be married for the rest of your life to this person, or you just assumed you were going to have a healthy, able-bodied child. She has found that people who don't see that lost possible self tend to not be able to engage in life with a fresh set of goals. So when it's appropriate, this comes up, and again, we talk about how can you say goodbye to that lost possible self? How can we dialogue about it? There are a variety of different ways people can say goodbye to their lost possible selves, and that's what Laura King says really works, these detailed essays. And then, okay, Diana Nyad, the Cuba to U.S. swim, this 61-year-old woman looks incredible. I mean, look at her. But she had to disengage from a goal that she just went at over and over and over again. And finally, she had to give up. She swam for 31 hours the second time recently. Her eyes were swollen shut with jellyfish stings. And she is kind of struggling with the fact that she can't forgive herself. If I were coaching her, what I'd be looking for, where is forgiveness and mercy? Are you persisting at this wrong goal? Is there a way that you can shift this around by using whatever you have? Humor, wisdom, bravery, any of these other things to basically say this goal is not going to work for me anymore. Let's find some new ones. So this is an essential piece of goal setting. And I think this last one is incredibly important. There are several strengths that if you have them, it makes it easier, and some that make it very, very difficult. You need to stop and savor the wins. You need to basically say, I did it, and not just move on and say, I'm always a work in progress. I did it. And so when you have gratitude, I have a friend who overcame ovarian cancer. She had a thank you party for everyone who showed up and did something helpful, whether it was driving her children or dropping off meals or whatever. So she had a thank you party. So in that way, she savored the fact, and she prolonged well-being. And this is what Rick Hansen talked about recently, the man who wrote the Buddha Brain, wonderful neuroscience, I think, researcher. And anyway, one of the things he was saying is, if someone is low in gratitude, one of the things you want to do to bring it up so you can savor the wins is deliberately call up into your mind things that have gone well in your life, things that you've worked at that you appreciate are good moments, and focus on it intensely with as much energy as you have for 30 seconds. That's a wonderful way to bring up gratitude, but also savor what's good in your life, what's gone well. And appreciation of beauty and excellence, creativity, love and be loved, teamwork. These are all things that I think have been useful in helping people savor the wins. Where I find people struggle with this step is I'm always scanning the list saying, where is modesty? Some people cannot celebrate the wins because they're modest and they think it's impolite to feel good about something they've done. Also, if they're low in love and be loved, they have trouble loving themselves. They don't feel like they deserve to feel happy about some of the things they've done. And also for some people who are low in hope, they may feel like they can't replicate it. It happened, it's good, but they can't replicate it. And I think we may be right at the end of our time, but I wanted to end with kind of other ways to contact me or kind of be in the swing of what I do. I do teach goal setting, kind of a two-part class, because I think it's just critical. I think all children in this country and every country should learn goal setting because it's a huge piece of being able to self-regulate and achieve things that matter in life. We're not a quick-fix society. We shouldn't be, I should say. It just makes life worth living. So that's how I use character strengths. I find that my work is just immeasurably better, richer. My clients love the VIA, and there's really not a day that goes by that I can't honestly say people do benefit from having this new language in their lives, and probably the best thing I've added to my practice in the last 6 years. So that's how I feel about the VIA.
Well, this has been an incredible presentation. Thank you so much, Caroline. And actually, I'm noticing we actually have, I think, everybody still on the line listening to you. So that speaks to you that we're a little bit past the hour and everybody is still engaged in this talk. Do you have a few minutes to answer questions
Sure.
or no?
Yeah.
You do? Okay,
no,
wonderful.
If you do, I do. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, there's been a number. I'll try to be selective. There's been a bunch coming in, and we'll try to handle any extra questions we don't have time to get to, maybe back channel. But one question that comes in that relates to your last slide on savoring, and this person's asking, it seems to me that if we don't learn to practice mindfulness, kind of noticing what's happening in our daily lives, we miss many of the components of flourishing. And would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And in fact, I always am saying that the practice of mindfulness, if you want to call it meditation, or any kind of mindful practice, I think that's the silver bullet, at least in the world of positive psychology research. It does nothing but good things. And I closely relate mindfulness to also active constructive responding, which is the ability to be mindful in the moment and respond to people in an appropriate way, in a positive way, so that you're not what's called absent present. I mean, you're present, but you're not really there for people and what's going on in their lives. And I have a lot of clients who are chained to BlackBerries, and they can't put them down in order to be mindful about who's in their life. So I think the two are part and parcel of each other. That's a great comment, actually. Not even a question, it's a great comment.
Yeah, yeah, and a great response by you. As you know, the mindfulness literature is really tied into so many areas of positive psychology. And
Yeah.
wait, here's another question. This individual is a wellness coach starting off, and they say, as a wellness coach starting out, how would you suggest I become more familiar with strengths in relation to goals to help my clients with this?
I just have to say, I think I'm the only one who does it like this. So it might be helpful to read my book. I do have these classes I teach, where 4-week classes where I basically teach this, because the two are inextricable, to me at least. And I think people who are setting goals with clients really should understand how deeply scientific goal setting is, because it's so beyond SMART goals. I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. So I guess there's my book. I don't know if Heidi Halverson's book goes into it quite like this. Who else? Oh, gee. Gosh, I think that's the best answer I can give, and I wish it weren't.
Okay, great. And then the next question, to what extent do you think the VIA strengths can be learned versus to what extent are they inborn?
What a good question. You could probably answer that better than I could, Ryan, but I will say that I think if I just take myself as an example, and I asked myself this, and I had talked to you about it last week actually, is when I saw that I had wisdom and love and be loved and bravery in terms of overcoming bulimia, was I born with that, or did I develop it as part of being a fighter? And I think probably you can further develop things that are latent strengths by using them in the pursuit of something very meaningful. And in that way, I think you strengthen them and they move to the front. But I think some are basically inborn. I think some kids, I've got 3 of my own, some are born really zestful and some are not. And some are born curious and some are not. But can you intervene on yourself to raise them? Absolutely. That has been my experience, is that Sonia Lubomirsky talks about willpower and way power as the way to change your life. It's not enough to want to change something. You have to have the willpower to do it and then the way to do it. And I think character strengths actually give us both. They give us both the willpower and the way to do it.
Okay, great. Next question. When people reject a signature strength and seem somewhat resistant about that, about having a particular signature strength, how do you help them to see that this is not a negative?
It's another good question. Okay, so that does happen. Happens more often than people think. I think what I do is, I say, are there any times when you can see that beauty and excellence has actually been helpful to you? It's not just about going to museums. I think some people automatically say beauty and excellence. Those are people who are artists who would like to go to museums, and I don't like either one of them. One of the things you can say is, let's reframe it. When you see excellence in your work, someone else's work, in just in life in general, is that something that you see as a way to create more well-being? Can you see it that way? So sometimes you reframe it and talk to people about other ways that it may have manifested that they're overlooking. Something came up the other day where someone said, gosh, I don't know why I'm low in bravery. I consider myself very brave. And we kind of looked at her top 5 strengths. And what we saw is that those 5 strengths were actually better ways. She had used them more often to create the life that she wanted. And so she wasn't exactly rejecting her top 5. She was saying, why isn't this other one that I think is so important in the top 5? But generally it involves kind of an open-ended dialogue. Can you think of any times when this has actually been helpful to you? Karen Rivich at Penn talked about how she kind of creates playing cards. And she will flip them over on the desk and say, let's play with this one. This is your top 5. Let's talk about it. How could you use this more in your life? And when do you think you might not acknowledge it? Like bravery. When I saw that I had bravery in my top 5, it never occurred to me that writing that book was brave. But in fact, I guess it was to some people. So I think it just involves a more extended dialogue. People have knee-jerk reactions to some words that need to be unpacked a little bit.
Yes, yeah, great response. Well, there a couple other questions, just there might be real quick ones based on references or sources to a couple things that you said, and then maybe we could conclude. One was asking about the source for the New York Times article, like if you know who the article was written by or what issue it was in. And then the other question was regard to the Medal of Honor research by Chris Peterson. If you happen to know the year or the journal or anything like that.
Oh boy. Okay. The New York Times article was on Sunday, and I don't. I think I may have saved it. So if people want to write to me individually, I will send it to them. I'm assuming it's the one about therapy. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's the one. Yeah.
Okay. Because I also mentioned a great article on neophilia, which is just great. I think I mentioned neophilia, the pursuit of new things and novelty, because it's so good for the brain. That was a great article. But send me an email. I will send you the article. And so it was in the most recent Sunday New York Times. The Chris Peterson, I'm pretty sure, is in his primer in positive psychology. It's work that he references quite often, so I'm just going to point you right to Chris Peterson's positive psychology primer. So I think it'll be in there.
Great. And that's a textbook. It came out in about 2006 if people are looking to grab that book. Okay, excellent. Well, wonderful job with the presentation and the questions. And on behalf of all the many people that are still on the line listening, we just really want to thank you, and we want to all express our gratitude, strength to you, Caroline, for taking the time to do this and pass along so much wisdom that we can then pass along to our clients. You did a great job at really integrating, personal story with professional examples, with scholarly research, in a way that's user-friendly and accessible. So we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and I want to acknowledge that time is money, and anyone who is still on this call, I really appreciate the time you've spent just listening, so I'm very aware that this is an investment, and I appreciate it, because I'm passionate about my work, and I'm just grateful that people are interested to hear about parts of it. So thank you for giving me the VIA to talk about, because it's so wonderful, and thank you, everyone, for your time and energy in coming.
Okay, wonderful. Take care, Caroline, and have a great month, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.